Cheating Wives Victims Club. I was always fascinated by the large glass panels that separated airplanes from passenger terminals at airports. I couldn't imagine how they fabricated such large pieces of glass and how they were transported and installed. Today, nothing moved outside. Nothing but the snowflakes. They were descending like little parachutes, swinging from side to side, big, heavy, wet flakes of white cold. They had started falling about 2 hours ago. It was shortly before I was scheduled to leave on a 3-day business trip. The last intercom message indicated that the delay would last at least another 2 hours. The snowplows were able to clear it, but it was too heavy for airplanes to take off. Castleberry Airport wasn't that big, but its location was convenient for use as a transfer hub for flights from various airlines. I called home several times to let my wife Marcia know that the flight was delayed, but no one answered. I figured she was out clearing the walkway. She figured it was better to shovel a light layer of snow 3 or 4 times than to shovel a thick layer of snow once. I was usually the one who shoveled, so I was kind of glad she could enjoy it while I was gone. Marcia and I had been happily married for 22 years. We had 2 sons who were in college, so when I had to make trips, she was alone. Occasionally, she would go with us if it was an interesting place, but usually she preferred to stay home. The best part of the trips was the homecoming love when I returned. I always felt like the separation was worth it. After a while, watching the snow had a slightly hypnotizing effect on me. Stretching my legs seemed like a good idea, so I wandered into the VIP lounge. I recognized a fellow traveler sitting at a table with 3 other stranded souls. He noticed me as I entered and waved me over. "Eddie, sit down and join the Cheating Hearts Club." I remembered his name was Duncan, but I'd never met the others. "I assume you're all Hank Williams fans?" "Sorry, Eddie. You're wrong on that assumption. Hi, I'm Archie." The biggest guy at the table extended his hand in greeting. The rest of the group quickly followed suit. The truth is, we're all victims of cheating wives. When we realized that, we formed a club. All of this happened, of course, within the last hour. The explanation was accompanied by a chorus of groans and cynical laughter around the table. The youngest guy in the group, who called himself Bryce, called the waitress over and ordered another round of drinks. They were about 3 rounds ahead of me at this point, so I was the only one who was completely sober. I was a bad drunk at best. As the newest entrant, I had to pay for the last order. "Sorry, guys. I'd love to sit and chat about your family troubles, but I can't join your club as I'm happily married." Cedric, the oldest member of the group, found this amusing. After a sarcastic but friendly laugh, he looked around the table. "I think our newest member is in denial." It appeared that a little good-natured banter was the beginning of joining an informal impromptu group. But I didn't mind. After about 10 minutes of the usual chatter, Bryce looked at me. "So, Eddie, tell us, what's your loving wife doing as we speak, and what's your secret to making her happy?" "Well, since it's already snowing, I assume she's shoveling the driveway." "Why do you think she does that?" "Well, she's not answering her home phone or her cell phone. She must be outside." "Does she usually expect you to call her now?" "No. I usually wait until I'm comfortable. Sometime tomorrow morning." A low groan spread across the table after I said it. They were all expressing disbelief at my statement. "What? What the hell are you trying to say?" Cedric decided to speak up. "Let me be clear. You leave home on a trip out of town for a week and your wife out of nowhere is unreachable on her home or cell phone. Does that happen a lot usually?" "What do you mean?" "Think about it. How often does your wife find herself in a situation where you can't reach her on either phone?" "Never. That's why I think she's shoveling the driveway." I was rewarded with another round of moans. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed our home phone and Marcia's cell phone. There was no answer on either of them. I ended up having to contend with 4 smirks from 4 cynical drunks. To hell with it. I needed another drink. I tried to think of a way to get the guys off my back for a while. "How did you tramps get so hardened by all this? A lot of couples break up. It's not a big deal these days." "Well, we've all broken up because our wives had affairs. None of them were what you'd call normal divorces. They were all the result of infidelity on the wife's part." "And how did you all find out about these affairs?" Archie kind of volunteered to go first. "I was just about to go to work one day when I heard the end of a conversation my wife was having. All I heard were the words, hot bath, and wine. In the last few weeks before this, My wife Joan had gotten into the habit of deleting phone calls from her cell phone right after she was finished. I had noticed her doing this, but hadn't thought anything of it until then. For some reason, it just didn't seem right. Given her recent behavior and the snippets from the phone call, I was curious. I waited until she left the room and then picked up her phone. She had 8 speed dial numbers. All of them belonged to family or friends except the last one. I couldn't understand why my wife would preload the number of a nail salon into her cell phone. I wrote down the number and left for work. I had a feeling that some of the guys had heard this story before, but I couldn't wait to hear the rest of it. My secretary had no trouble figuring out who the nail salon phone number actually belonged to. Todd Mitchell, a local real estate agent and family friend. I made a few phone calls and discovered that only 2 motels in town had hot tubs, and only 1 room was booked for the day. I called my wife and asked if she wanted to meet for lunch. She said she couldn't because she had to meet her friend Janet. Since that was bullshit, I figured she was going to meet Todd on her lunch hour. I put his number in my cell phone and headed to the Rainbow Motel. Duncan ordered another round of drinks, but I switched to a Coke. Archie continued the story of his wife's adventures. Todd arrived at the motel before me and parked his Mercedes in front of room 117. I parked a few spaces away from him. I only had to wait a few minutes before Joan's Civic pulled into the back parking lot. I got out of the car and leaned on the fender. The look on her face was unforgettable when she recognized me. She knew I had seen her, and she had no choice but to park and get out. She tried desperately to convince me that Janet had met her there, and they were just going to share a car ride to the restaurant. I didn't say anything, but just smiled. She fell silent, and I pulled out my cell phone and dialed a new, preloaded number. When Todd answered, I said, "Joan's going to be a little late today, and they're going to tow your car." My wife stood there with her mouth hanging open as Todd jerked open the motel room door to see what was going on with his Mercedes. By then, I was already standing at the door. As he ran out, he tripped over my outstretched leg and fell straight face down. A swift kick to the genital area completed the job. I calmly got into my car and drove to the lawyer's office. 6 months later, I was a free man, and so was Todd. I take it you had no idea anything was going on until you happened to overhear part of the conversation? That's right, Eddie. I found out later that they'd been together for almost a year. I trusted my wife, and I had no reason to doubt her fidelity. There is no one more trusting than a loving husband. Duncan stretched out in his chair, trying unsuccessfully to turn it into a deep armchair. Maybe you should call your wife again, Eddie. She's probably finished trashing the place by now. When neither the house phone nor her cell phone answered, I was rewarded with a line of groans and eye rolls. Bryce leaned over the table. "Eddie, do you have a neighbor you could call? Just to see if everything is okay?" Polishing the little phone book I had in my coat pocket, I called the old man who lived across the street. He was retired and liked to be the eyes and ears of the neighbors. Cedric ordered another round of drinks. He'd switched to Coke, too. "So what the hell did he say?" I didn't notice who asked the question. "Marcia left the house about 2 hours ago, just as the snow began to fall. He hadn't seen her since. The driveway and sidewalk hadn't been cleared. As expected, a loud, sustained groan echoed around the table. It was as if they were all saying at the same time, 'I told you so.'" It was Bryce's turn to entertain the group. "Well, at least I saw this coming. I don't know how long it had been going on when I started noticing little things. Sadie and I had 3 kids in high school, and I was on the road a lot more often than I should have been. The only good thing was that she kept the affair a secret from the kids and never brought the guy into the house. At least, I don't think she ever did. I ended up staging a trip out of town to check things out. It was pretty simple. He picked her up at the mall, and they drove to a motel about 20 minutes from our house. I watched from the sidelines as they took the elevator up to the 3rd floor. I'm a pretty calm guy, but I will resort to violence if I feel it's necessary. I drove home from the motel and grabbed a cooler full of sodas, a crossword puzzle, a baseball bat, and a chaise lounge. I took my time getting back to the motel. Duncan ordered a large plate of nachos from the bar. Bryce continued his story. The receptionist gave me a strange look when I walked in, but didn't say anything. I settled right by the elevator door on the 3rd floor and waited. I took a good piss before leaving the house so I wouldn't have to leave my post. My reward came about 2 hours later. Sadie came out of her room with her friend and immediately saw me sitting there. I recognized the guy as a neighbor from the next street over. He was married and had 2 kids. She ducked back into the room, and I could tell she had pulled him with her by the way he moved. It wasn't like that, was it? No, but nothing interesting really happened. Over the next 15 minutes, he looked out from behind the door several times. He decided to confront me, but when he left the room, I stood up with a baseball bat in my hand, and he quickly returned. Finally, the motel manager took the elevator. We argued for a few minutes. He asked me to leave, but I refused. Finally, he threatened to call the police, and I told him that was a good idea. 20 minutes later, the police arrived. I told them that I feared for her life and that the rapist was holding her against her will. It was a ridiculous story, but it brought the cops into the room to talk to Sadie and her boyfriend. 10 minutes later, the cops came out of the room. Their demeanor had softened a bit. In a quiet voice, the officer told me that my wife was afraid to leave the room because of what she had done. She asked them if they could take her to her sister's house, but wanted me to leave before she came out. I left and headed straight to my attorney's office. She got the kids and the house, and I got my freedom. Sadie's boyfriend turned out to be a bachelor too, but not by choice. Another round of drinks appeared. We haven't had any news about the flight being delayed. Eddie, do you have any close family friends or acquaintances that Marcia could confide in while you're out of town? Duncan tried to be tactful, but the question still hurt a little. Most of our friends are married. The only guy I can think of is one of Marcia's old college friends who just moved back to town about 6 months ago. She mentioned him a few times at first, but lately she hasn't mentioned his name at all. I didn't like him because he was a little ingratiating. How friendly were they in college? It was my turn to groan. He was a member of a college fraternity. We all got down to our nachos and Cedric started telling us about his spouse. Julie and I had been married for 23 years. There were no children, and I traveled a lot for work. I was just returning from a 3-month job in Peru when things went south. The day before I left home, I was bitten by a nasty spider. The doctor wrote me a prescription for an antibiotic, but I couldn't take it until I got back. I had a local pharmacist who knew everyone by name. When I was placing the order, he asked me if I wanted to take Julia's prescription home since it was already ready. It wasn't a problem, but the pills were. I had had a vasectomy 10 years earlier, and my wife had gotten the prescription for birth control pills 2 days before I left for my trip. She had planned it in advance. I had a hard time keeping track of Cedric because I kept catching my mind wandering. His name was Travis Coates. He was handsome and apparently rich. He drove a nice car and had a good job. For some reason, I had his address and phone number in my address book. I still felt he was scum, but I could see where Marcia might have found him attractive. The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I became. I tried to focus on what Cedric was saying. I hadn't said anything to Julie about birth control pills. When I had the chance, I checked my cell phone bills for the past few months and verified the calls. 20 minutes after my plane took off, 3 months ago, she called Langford Landscaping. It was the guy who mowed our lawn. Terry Langford moved here from Kentucky with his wife and 3 kids. He started a lawn mowing company and gave it a fancy name. Julie had called him almost 30 times in the last 3 months. No other suspicious calls were on the list. The next morning I called Terry. He wasn't home, but his wife was more than willing to talk to me. It seems Julie was paying Terry $50 every time he came to the house and serviced her. His wife didn't like it, but she said they needed the money to feed the kids. It wasn't her idea, but I still felt I needed some satisfaction. I told his wife I would be back the next day. By the time I got there the next morning, they were gone. I don't know if I was disappointed because I didn't get a chance to talk to him, or glad he was gone. 2 days later, I served my wife with divorce papers. We decided not to order any more drinks. So, Eddie, what did you decide to do? I know it sounds silly, but it doesn't look like we'll be going anywhere for a while yet. Since the planes are snowed in, how do you guys feel about a car trip? In this weather? You're crazy. Archie didn't seem to like it. How far away from here do you live, and what do you drive? Cedric was a little interested. I have a 4-wheel drive Explorer, and I live less than an hour from here, even in this weather. 5 minutes later, we were ready to go. Even Archie was okay with it. Bryce left his cell phone number with the ticket agent so we could be contacted. I parked the Ford in the Marriott customer parking lot by the terminal. Duncan entered Travis's address into the navigator, and we hit the road. It could well have been a waste of time. but it was an exciting endeavor. Duncan, you still have a story to tell, and we're definitely a mesmerized audience. Why don't you start? This all happened about 3 years ago. My wife Kelly and I were in a civic club. On the weekends, we would get together to dance, drink, and eat dinner outside of the house. The guys usually played poker in the basement while the women did what they usually did. This particular evening started off badly when I noticed that Clayton Mankey showed up. Kelly and Clayton had been close friends in high school 25 years ago. In fact, they'd been a steady couple for at least 2 years. Clayton graduated college and moved away, but I always had the feeling that Kelly was still thinking about him. They danced a few times, and I could tell they were trying not to be too flashy. I noticed that while they were talking, Kelly would glance in my direction every now and then. I always positioned myself in such a way that I didn't seem to be watching them. Once I saw her say something and then look at her watch. I thought it was interesting. Are we going to hear all this before we get to Eddie's, Duncan? Patience, my good friends. I did a little socializing and found out that Clayton is staying in the penthouse suite at the Madison Inn. Apparently, he was very successful in the advertising business and didn't mind bragging about it. Trying not to be conspicuous, I also found out that he was driving a white Lexus. The time was approaching 9 o'clock when the poker game usually started. Kelly could always count on me to play until at least midnight. I casually mentioned to my wife that I'd be downstairs soon and hoped she wouldn't mind. Of course, she didn't mind. A few minutes later, I noticed her looking across the room at Clayton. She raised her hand and showed 5 fingers and then 4. He smiled and nodded. It wasn't hard to walk out the back door, grab my car, and drive to Madison. I parked in an inconspicuous spot and went inside. The parking lot was easy to watch, and 10 minutes later a white Lexus pulled up. While Clayton escorted my wife into the lobby, I took the elevator to the 3rd floor. I waited patiently until he began to descend back to the lobby. The look on my wife's face when the door opened was priceless. I looked at Clayton and said, "I'm going home early. When you're done with her, give her a ride home." Stepping off the elevator, I could no longer contain my anger. A swift right punch broke Clayton's nose. He landed flat on the floor. 10 minutes later, I was home, and another 10 minutes later, a cab dropped Kelly off. She got in, looked at me, and ran into the bedroom. Later that night, I drove myself to the emergency room where I had my broken arm repaired. I never realized that punching a guy in the face could hurt your arm so badly. 4 months after that, I got divorced. Wow, he finished on time. That's a great story, Duncan. So, how close are we to the rendezvous point? Bryce seemed to be getting worried. Turn left after a mile and a half, Eddie. The closer we got, the more interested the group became. It was still snowing, but a little slower. None of the streets had been cleared yet. It was actually beautiful, but I wasn't in the mood to appreciate it. You guys see that blue Focus on the left? Yeah. Is that it? I parked a few feet away from the Focus and got out. With a quick swipe of my hand, I brushed the snow off the driver's door and opened it. She had left her purse on the passenger seat of the car. Her cell phone was inside, and it had 3 missed calls on it, all from me. By then, all the guys had gotten out of the SUV. What are you going to do, Eddie? You want to go inside? 5 of us could really scare this guy. That's a good idea, Archie, but I think I'll keep a low profile. Can one of you guys drive the SUV back to the parking lot? Duncan intervened. No problem. We can just GPS back if we get lost. About that time, Bryce's cell phone rang. The flight was supposed to be ready in an hour. We had just enough time to get back. Cedric and Archie cleared all the snow off the van, and we were on our way to the airport in no time. I parked the Focus next to the Explorer in the free parking lot. I'd only be gone for 5 days. By then, Marcia would have realized what had happened. If she'd reported the van to the police, they'd have no problem finding it. I'm sure she'd be trying hard to come up with some explanation, but it would be futile. I'll be contacting my lawyer tomorrow. In 6 months, I'll be a member of the Cheating Hearts Club. The chances of all 5 guys getting back together were pretty slim, but we had an interesting evening. It took me over a year to bring Travis down. I took advantage of all the favors my friends had given me over the years. He had built his career on brilliant talk, but he didn't have the skills and knowledge to back it up. I would have loved to pursue my revenge, but he disappeared overnight. The house was sold, and I ended up having to give half the proceeds to Marcia. She received no alimony or retirement money. Somehow all of our friends and family were able to figure out the reason for the breakup. Marcia was not happy. The end.